Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I am recording, so if anybody who intended to come today wasn't able to make it and still wants this content. I'm gonna try to put a recording of this session on the website. I'll definitely put the PowerPoint from all of our sessions for the NOFO Day of Learning on the website. I don't know if I'll be able to get a video on there, but I'm gonna do my best for this one because, it's good content to be able to go back to in case you need it along the way. So what you can expect from this session, we're gonna meet from 1 to 2:30. And this session is designed to help break down the application process for agencies that are interested in applying for CoC funds for the first time, so as a new applicant. I do have some content to present to you, but we're gonna prioritize opportunities for discussion. So please feel free to speak up in person or on Zoom. I know sometimes on Zoom, it's hard to catch a pause in the room when there's a lot of people. So if you prefer to do the little raise your hand emote, that will put you at the top of my screen and we'll be happy to pause for you. But really, while I have slides and everything, I don't want this to be so much a presentation as it is just a informed discussion. We don't always have opportunities for people to be able to ask their questions or provide input along the way. But today we do have that opportunity, so don't feel like you have to hold questions till the end or anything. And at the end of this session, the goal is that you'll leave with a general understanding of the NOFO application process. And really, most importantly, you'll know where to look for additional resources. One of the things to just get out in the open up front is that this is a bit of a complicated process that takes some commitment. And HUD recognizes that, and they try to give new applicants lots of resources to help them along the way. So they have this platform called HUD Exchange, which is where they communicate with all of their CoCs and member agencies. And there's really lots of good materials on HUD Exchange to help new applicants. So I hope after today, you have a little direction in finding those. But before we start, another thing that's important to get out there is that, the Upstate CoC and every CoC across the nation, we get our CoC funded grants through a funding competition. So it is a competitive process. And because of that, we're not able to guarantee the ability to create new projects with bonus funds every single year. So in other words, if you do all the work of applying for a project, unfortunately, we cannot guarantee that that project will be funded. The competitive funding process is competitive in two ways. We compete with other CoCs across the nation. So of course, we're trying to score as high as we can. And a lot of the determination on whether or not we get bonus funding comes from how we score compared to other CoCs across the nation. But then our local grantees also compete with each other. And what I mean by that is that a part of this process is that we have to create a priority listing. We'll look at some examples of that in a minute. But the priority listing, it basically tells HUD, if you can only fund 10 projects and we have 15, then we've ranked our projects for you and here's the top 10 for you to fund. And we'll look at, a little bit more detail about the determinations of how we achieve those bonus funds as well. Okay. So if this is your first time hearing about the NOFO, or maybe you're still not super familiar, the NOFO is an acronym for the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Put it in still. Oops. The NOFO itself is actually the written announcement that signifies the beginning of the annual CoC program funding competition. But when we talk about the competition, we also often refer to the entire process as the NOFO. So when we say NOFO, we're generally not talking about like that specific announcement. Rather, we're just using that acronym to talk about the whole funding competition. And the NOFO process is made up of two parts. First, we have agencies that are seeking funding from the CoC that will submit their project applications, whether they're creating a new project or renewing existing ones. And then the second part is that we have the lead agency or also known as the collaborative applicant, which is United Housing Connections. They'll submit a collaborative application, and the collaborative application is a narrative-based one that summarizes the work that we're doing as a coalition. So not just the work of one agency. And this collaborative application is what is scored as HUD. So that's where that score is coming from when I talk about how important it is that our score is high compared to other COCs in the nation. So eligible applicants, this is the baseline of eligible applicants: nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, Indian tribes or tribally designated housing entities, states, local governments, and instrumentalities of state or local governments. This is the list from the CoC program interim rule, which was most recently updated in 2017. But I will let you know that they released the most updated version or updated listing of eligible applicants in every NOFO. So that announcement that signifies the beginning of the competition, they get very specific about this year. Our list of eligible applicants includes X, Y, and Z. And so it often does look exactly like this, but it is subject to change. And then there are very specific project types that you can create with CoC funding. These project types are also generally listed in the CoC program interim rule, but just like with the eligible applicants, they are year specific, so they may change. And we have actually seen a change from the 2017 interim rule to where we are now. So if you're in the 2017 interim rule, you may read that one of the eligible project types is transitional housing. In the most recent NOFO, transitional housing is no longer available. I think that went away a couple of years ago. And you'll notice that the joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing project is a new project type that's not listed in the interim rule. So I say all that just to say that the interim rule is a good place to start, but both of those places are subject to change every single funding competition.
So you have to have joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing, or it can be one or the other?
You cannot have only transitional housing funded by the CoC. You can have only rapid rehousing, but they've done away with just the general transitional housing. At this point, it would have to be the joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing project. So rapid rehousing is a short-term, well, not short-term, but a quick turnaround permanent housing solution. That's where the person or your client would find their own place to rent, and then their rent is subsidized, typically for about 3 to 6 months. And they're offered case management during that time and case management afterwards to help them stabilize themselves after that financial subsidy has tapered off. Permanent supportive housing is assistance to individuals with disabling conditions or families where one adult or a child has a disabling condition. So that disabling condition is a requirement for the permanent supportive housing project. With the permanent supportive housing project, the agency leases or they may own the unit and then subleases that unit to the client. There's like a subdivision of permanent supportive housing, which is called dedicated plus. And that means that all of your units are going to people that have that disabling condition and they've experienced chronic homelessness. All of our PSH programs right now in the Upstate CoC are that dedicated plus. So all of our current PSH is for people with disabling conditions and chronic homeless status.
And so those disabling conditions are what's listed on NHMIS?
Yeah. So like when you're filling out somebody's assessment and you fill out that yes or no, do they have a disability? And then there's that long list where you have to click either yes or no. So the mental health condition, physical conditions, developmental, that whole list is what would be considered a disabling condition for a
So in my case, it's drug addiction.
Yeah, that's one of them as well. And then this joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing project is a newer project type. It's taken the place of traditional transitional housing. And what this looks like is sort of a double project where it is what you would think of in terms of transitional housing. It has that longer stay of assistance, 12 to 24 months, where the agency either owns or leases and then subleases to the client. But then it also has a really kind of established exit plan where once they leave your transitional housing project, you have a rapid rehousing project to help support them out on their own. So you would encourage them to, find their own place to rent on the open market, and you would have some level of funds set aside to help provide a tapering financial assistance to their rent. We don't have anybody in our CoC that's running this project type right now. I think it's a really interesting one. I'd like to see what it looks like in practice. I think it could be really cool. But we don't have anybody running this right now. That does present a little bit of a challenge to new applicants because you wouldn't really have a lot to model. But there still are a lot of resources on HUD Exchange about what exactly this looks like. And then the last project type is the supportive services only project. Supportive services only projects allow recipients to provide supportive services, such as conducting outreach, providing referrals to other housing and any other necessary services to people while they are experiencing homelessness. This recipient can assist program participants if those program participants are in a program that's not funded by the CoC. Any questions about those project types?
So the joint transitional housing, rapid rehousing, that would fit into our program where when they leave us and we put them in independent living.
So it sounds a lot like the model that you have at Go Forth, where they're exiting a transitional housing project to your independent living program. You just have to be really adamant about reading the exact requirements for these HUD programs, because while it's not prohibited to use CoC funds to support an existing program, you just have to be super sure that the build of your program falls under the parameters that HUD says these projects have to fall under.
So they promote new projects, but not existing.
You can do existing projects, it would just be very, very hard.
So how do the people that have received this funding year after year for the same program?
So their agency applied for the first time to build a brand new rapid rehousing project, for example. And then year after year, they're able to renew that same grant.
But it's not changing in any way, it's the same thing, correct?
Yeah. It's just, if United Housing Connections, we run our housing resource center. That's funded by something other than the continuum of care. It would be very hard for us to apply for continuum of care funding to support that project that already exists, because that project would have to fall under the super specific HUD parameters. So instead, we would apply for rapid rehousing funds and start up a whole new project. And then you can just reapply to run that new project after that first year.
So it'd be the steps are apply for a brand new project, like we're gonna build or buy more houses.
So as a new applicant, it is definitely easier to apply to build a new project. Yes.
Well, it's not easier since not many new projects get funded.
It's
You have a
easier
better
to build a
chance
new project
if there is a new project. Yes, I understand.
than it is to make the HUD parameters fit with your project that already exists.
Understood.
So for example, any project that's funded by the CoC would have to get clients from the Upstate CoC's coordinated entry system.
For the rapid rehousing, you can't,
Or
you can't,
both?
or any of those 3 permanent housing projects. Rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, or joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing.
it has to go out, it can't be, the spaces can't be filled through the current program.
That's correct.
So it would be, anybody could end up in,
It would be referred from our full continuums prioritization list.
understood. So really for us, the supportive services is the only thing I can apply.
I wouldn't say that. You could apply for any project that you wanted to, but you would have to understand and like agree to the parameters. That if I apply for a rapid rehousing project that's funded by the CoC, HUD says, okay, the people that go into that project have to come from your CoC's coordinated entry list. And so
Right.
they couldn't just be people that show up at your agency's door or come through your emergency shelter or transitional housing. It has to be through the coordinated entry system.
So you can't pick and choose who comes. in.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that would rule us out.
if that's
Yeah, because our guys,
foundational to,
yeah, because again, I'm just for us, but I'm not gonna take somebody from the outside that hasn't come through the program and we haven't vetted. It's set up for guys coming off the streets through our program, independent.
Can I say something, Natalie? One of the things that we looked at in my other job, looked at doing some of this joint transitional and rapid rehousing. And in my old job, we had a specific thing for domestic violence victims. So it would have been real easy for, us to place them directly into our unit from the shelter. But they did have to come through the coordinated entry. So maybe, and you tell me if you think this is possible, but if you had somebody who was, because yours is drug and alcohol, you have to come through that program, right?
Correct.
Well, say you had somebody who, had been through your program and is this emergency shelter, right? He has
they
that.
do emergency shelter and transitional housing, which would both actually be eligible for coordinated entry.
Okay.
Yeah, I do HMIS for all our guys.
Okay, so one of the things that you might say, like now you have either one piece that's emergency and one piece that's transitional. With this new grant, you could say, hey, I'm gonna have some of my guys that come through my emergency program and go through this transitional piece of it where you get new leases. Cause if you do that, I mean, you're gonna have leasing dollars and rental assistance dollars. So you're gonna go in and say you go to a new property and you lease 6 units. So you lease 6 units of housing for your guys to come through a year of transitional housing. And your total budget is like $250,000. Well, in those joint transitional and rapid programs, you have to have more of your budget in the rapid program. So maybe it's only 3 transitional units, you know what I'm saying? But you could have your old type program that you have now. And do you maybe get ESG money, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
So you could have those programs and that's the way you use that one. And then have some of your guys coming through emergency shelter that could be eligible for this other program. They would just have to come through coordinated entry, right?
Yeah, I think, just that last little piece is the key.
Mhm.
Where the persons that are staying in an emergency shelter, they are eligible for coordinated entry. And it is possible and likely that they would be referred to your permanent housing project. You would just have to accept the fact that somebody else from coordinated entry would also have the same chance of being referred to your permanent housing project.
And we
You
would
can't
have,
take away that piece. That's a HUD mandated piece.
Yeah, I
Of
understand.
the people that enter that project have to come through coordinated entries.
and we would have to look at the housing first piece. Do we only want to do 25% of that? Because you probably do want sobriety and so, we'd have to look at.
Yeah,
carving
that's
out a
a lot.
percentage, yeah. So, yeah, housing versus we couldn't make them, so it'd have to go into the percentage.
And I do have the most recent NOFO is in the actual NOFO announcement, link to this slide where you can see more about, details about the eligible applicants and the project types. So this is just kind of a, bird's eye view of what it looks like to apply as a new applicant. The first thing that you have to do is meet our threshold requirements. Threshold requirements are sort of two pieces. We have our HUD threshold requirements, which HUD says your agency must have these certain things in order to be an eligible applicant. And then we also have our local threshold requirements where we add on to what HUD has given us to say, our continuum has decided that in order for an agency to be an eligible applicant, you have to do X, Y, Z. And we'll look at those really specifically. Once you meet those threshold requirements and you're determined to be an eligible applicant, you'll go into the application timeline. The NOFO, starts at the same time for all COCs across the nation, but after it starts, it's up to the lead agency to develop a local timeline of saying, here's your milestone of when this is due, and here's your milestone of when that is due. So that will be your process to follow during the application. And then the last piece is the rating and ranking. This is an overview of the process for rating new projects and then how we rank them on our priority listing, which again is that competitive piece where we have to list all of our applicants renewing and new in order of 1 to whatever our last number is to show HUD. If you can only give us 10 projects, then these are the 10 projects to fund. So this first piece is the HUD threshold requirements. The complete document of our threshold requirements is listed on our website, and I've got it tagged on this next slide here. But some of the biggest HUD threshold requirements is that your agency must have an active registration in the system for award management and have a UEID number. You have to meet the eligibility requirements listed in the HARP Act and the CoC program interim rule. As part of the NOFO process, you'll submit required certification, including certification of a drug-free workplace, certification regarding lobbying. The applicant must be able to demonstrate financial and management capacity to carry out the project, and your agency has no outstanding delinquent federal debts. The applicant understands that false statements are grounds for denial or termination of award, and the applicant agrees to participate in the local HMIS system, meaning that you will document in HMIS, which is our CoC shared database, the clients that you serve through the project that's going to be funded by the CoC. Any questions about the HUD mandated threshold requirements? Then the second half of the threshold requirements is our local threshold requirements. This is what the continuum has come up with. We just updated these recently as a grants committee, and that new version again can be found on our website linked at the bottom here. But here's a couple of the key ones. First, the project proposed adheres to housing first principles. If not housing first, then at least a low barrier implementation. The project proposed is financially feasible as determined by the grants committee. The applicant can provide evidence of documented, secure minimum match. Candace, would you remind me the percentage of match that's required for the CoC grants?
25%.
25%? Okay, so with the CoC grant, your agency must be able to provide 25% match to that grant. And so we would want to see what you intend to use for that. The applicant has at least one member with lived experience in homelessness on their board of directors. The applicant has attended 9 out of 12 or 75% of advisory council meetings in the past year. That's already one of our endorsement requirements for ESG2. And the applicant agrees to receive clients from the coordinated entry system. Any questions about local thresholds? Okay. So this is a sample of what our application timeline looks like. I'll preface this by saying it changes every year. Unfortunately, there's no built-in stability with this one. The NOFO competition begins when HUD releases the NOFO announcement. That's typically early July, but it really could happen anytime. The CoC and the lead agency, we don't know until it happens. We don't have any kind of insider information about when the competition will begin. We all kind of find out at the same time. So once we get that NOFO announcement, it's up to the lead agency to draft this local competition timeline. And this timeline is then approved by the grants committee. And we'll post it on our website just as quickly as we can because we know how critical it is for our applicants to have all of the milestones that they're expected to meet laid out really clearly in front of them as soon as they can get them. So typically it starts early July. By July 31st, we'll just look at last year's as a sort of example. By July 31st, we ask that all applicants have submitted their letter of intent to apply and their Housing First questionnaire through Cognito, which is just an online survey form. We'll look at what a letter of intent looks like and a Housing First questionnaire on the next few slides. And then a week after that, Grants Committee will let applicants know if their letter of intent to apply was approved. Later in August, applicants would email a PDF export of their project application to the Grants Committee for review. And what we're doing here is we're just allowing the Grants Committee to sort of read over your brand new application. Grants Committee is comprised of CoC grantees that have, a history of running these extensive grants. And the purpose is just that they can provide you with any advice that they think will help. And then they'll let you know if there's any changes that you need to make before you submit it in eSnaps, which is that database for all of our applications. We typically require that all of our individual applicants have their project application submitted 1 month before the very final due date of the whole NOFO. And then after that, it's all about working on our consolidated application. So again, this changes every year, but we do try to get it out there as quickly as we can. So these are really what your first steps as a new applicant would look like after you've met the threshold requirements. So threshold requirements is that first check of, does HUD say you're eligible and do you meet what the CoC asks you to meet? And then this is the first step of the application process. So the very first thing that you would submit is your letter of intent to apply. And that lets the lead agency and the grants committee know this year my agency wants to apply for CoC funding. I would definitely recommend that you give yourself plenty of time because a lot of the letter of intent is constructing narrative on the history of your agency, the project that you intend to build, because it really just helps us get to know you and make sure we are confident in your ability to meet all of the grant requirements. It also helps us confirm if you are an eligible applicant, like we might ask you to attach your 501c3 status. And it helps us confirm that you have, the financial capacity and good standing for grant management. So we might ask you to attach your most recent financial audit. And I've got an example linked from the 2023 letter of intent to this presentation. I would definitely encourage you to go check it out. It is subject to change, but not drastic changes by any means. And then the second half of, that first step is the Housing First questionnaire. This one's a lot shorter than the letter of intent to apply. It's sort of like a little miniature quiz that pretty much helps us feel comfortable that you understand and are ready to implement the Housing First principles that HUD requires. Housing First principles can be a little difficult for new applicants to maneuver through. are not always you read them and then it's not always super easy to like think of how you're going to implement them. So we're not doing this housing first questionnaire to like trip up anyone and say, you failed, you don't understand, you're gonna have to wait till next year. At any time that you're filling out this housing first questionnaire, you have any questions about how you're expected to respond, it's not inappropriate for you to ask UHC or another grants committee member, hey, I don't really understand this principle, will you help me with this question? And then if you fill it out and you didn't get all of them right, that's not an end all be all of your application this year. The grants committee is just gonna meet with you and make sure we're all on the same page about those housing first principles. Candace might be able to touch on this too, since you brought it up earlier, but HUD wants for all of our projects in the CoC to adhere to those housing first principles. They urge us to do that, and it's a piece of how we score, but we don't have to have all of our projects as housing first. Only 75% of them must meet the housing first principles. So, like in the case of Go Forth, requiring somebody to be sober to enter a project would be contradictory to housing first principles, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we couldn't do that. We have a little leeway to be able to build those kinds of projects.
I just think that it would be, specific to that type of agency. And we had discussed this some time back. Obviously, somebody who, when you're doing housing first, that means you have to take people who may or may not be in active addiction. And so that makes performance a little bit harder. And so how would you pick which ones could go? Well, the point here is that somebody who is intentionally serving drug and alcohol for a treatment program or a long-term program would require them to, be sober for those reasons. So we're looking at that potentially.
Oh, yeah, I was looking at the thing online, the
Yeah.
questions.
But that's what it means. You could not require them to be sober, housing first. That's a piece of it. So, and like Natalie said, only 75% have to be in order to get all the points, like we talked about point systems earlier. So,
Yeah, and for us, when someone leaves our program, they don't need any support, they get their own place on their own. And then we've had, I don't know how many now that have come straight off the street that have bought their own house. So it's hard to take that result and then fold it into this application as it's housing first because. But I can figure it.
yes, I think so.
So what percentage are we currently at?
100.
100.
And have been since 2000.
Yeah,
Forever.
But there's a need for programs that aren't housing first. I certainly recognize that. There's nothing, we don't get penalized for having under 25% of our programs being housing first. That's totally acceptable.
So it's 75% as a whole, not like 75% per agency.
No, it's just
As a whole.
all
Okay.
CoC grantees.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
okay.
So we could very well
Yeah.
build a non-housing first project.
And go into a later conversation, but that makes me think about just coordinating tree itself and how that would go with referring clients to that program, what kind of assessment or additional assessment would they have to go through to be referred to something like that, so.
It's good. Proactive thinking.
Yeah. Definitely see the benefit of doing something that aren't.
And, we've talked about, a non-housing first project could be one that accepts people, as a extension of emergency service for people dealing with substance abuse disorder. It could be lots of other different kinds of things too. So it's not just substance abuse. Jessica says, good point, Anna.
I've been thinking, I promise.
But it would definitely, it would change the way we talk about that project at HTC and how we think about who would be eligible for that project, because we would have a little more authority.
But it would be cool, if we talk about
Mhm.
expanding coordinating.
Mhm. And having different approaches for different people, different
Mhm.
phases, wherever they're at.
Yeah, I mean, cause, I mean, you know, let's be honest, housing first can be a challenge sometimes, you know.
That was nicely said.
Even before, when we discussed it, it was just, like I said before, it would make things easier, so we have to have, an approach where, people do accept housing first.
Yeah, it's something I don't like, but it is what it is, so I have to deal,
Yeah.
I'd rather spend time trying to figure it out than.
Yeah,
If you want the HUD funds, you gotta play the HUD game.
and you accept people into your shelter, you just work with them that way, and it's low barrier to entry. That we could have a whole day on housing
Yeah.
first.
Yes.
Mark can give you some good examples.
Step 2 is actually filling out your project application. So there's that good bit of work up front to make sure you meet all of those threshold requirements. And you understand how first, and you've given us a letter of intent before you start your project application. The project application is all online, and it's in this not super intuitive database called eSnaps. Thank goodness HUD recognizes that, and they really are good at providing detailed instructions for new applicants on how to navigate through everything. So the very first thing that you do in eSnaps is you set up your agency's profile. So you're giving HUD all that basic information about who you are as an organization, helps them determine that you're an eligible applicant as well. And then you will establish your project application through this process isn't so bad, the funding opportunity registration. So you're basically telling HUD, hey, my organization is UHC and we're interested in applying this year. And so they'll attach the project application to your profile in eSnaps for you to start working on it. And then you'll complete that project application. This is the best thing ever, is the detailed instructions. They get into deep detail for every single question, saying, helping break down what exactly it is that they're looking for. So while it is a long process, that those detailed instructions really help get through it. But when you're building that project application, some of the things that you're gonna do is you're gonna attest to those required certifications. So the ones that we looked at, like the drug-free workplace. You're gonna provide a description of the project that you want to build. Talk about the supportive services that you may be offering in that project. Identify what population you're gonna serve. And you're gonna do a full breakdown of your budget by each budget line item. Once you have your application near complete, you're gonna, like we looked at in that timeline, they'll send a PDF version to the grants committee for review. And they may suggest some minor tweaks to your application. And it's just coming from a place of, we've experienced this before and we know what HUD is looking for. We want to help you succeed. And then HUD even gives you a checklist of, have you done all of these things in your application, as one final check before you submit. So we won't really look at what exactly the project application looks like. This is just a quick overview and a couple places to find some resources. But once you complete this new project application, every year after the first year, it gets so much easier. You don't have to build this project application from nothing every year. You only do that once, and then each time that you want to renew that, so every annual funding competition, you want to renew your grant, HUD gives you the option to submit without changes. There's a couple of things that you'll have to go through and verify, but it slashes the time spent on the project application after your first year. So it's hard that, our new applicants have the hardest hurdle, but it does get easier after the first year.
Is there a section to put reference letters in with it?
No, that's not one of the pieces that they require. They do have space for additional attachments, and I think the detailed instruction goes into what additional attachments may mean, but they don't ask specifically for reference letters.
that you can include.
If it's an acceptable attachment that's listed in their detailed instructions, yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, you don't have to have reference letters. I think that they figure that if you met the CoC's approval, you know, that's your reference letter.
Yeah, I think they have a small group that is reading like nationwide applications, so it's like running through. That's why they have
So
to.
they
be
actually
vetted.
read the application before it gets sent back to you. Someone from HUD?
HUD headquarters.
And so
Really?
HUD will get your project application, to make sure it fits all of their parameters and everything before they give you your grant agreement and the money to start.
So though the grant isn't improved locally, it's improved.
Well, it has to be approved locally to be in the full application.
Got it.
And see, the reason that you're submitting those PDFs are because, you know, we as a continuum don't want to submit something that have like the wrong population to serve. based
So it
on
comes
the-
to you guys approve who's gonna,
Yeah.
and then they have the final approval.
Yeah.
There you go.
And then once we have all of our applications in line, whether they are new applications or applications to renew an existing grant. Jessica said, so it's like UHC cosigns. Yeah, in a way, so like it's. So what happens is, it's a collaborative application that the Upstate CoC submits as one massive clump of applications to HUD. And it's United Housing Connections as the lead organization of the CoC that's responsible for clumping, as in taking new applications from new grantees and the renewing applications from existing grantees, looking over them, saying, yep, as far as I can tell, this meets all the HUD parameters. We decide to accept them into the clump and then send it all.
I like that call.
Yeah.
Very technical.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's a good way to think about it, but. So, yeah, after the application is approved, UHC doesn't have anything to do with it. It's between HUD and the applying organization. Now, the Upstate CoC has a monitoring committee that monitors, how you're using your grant, just to make sure you are adhering to the HUD principles and is there to help you along the way. But, yeah, UHC doesn't have anything to do with your grant after HUD says it's been awarded.
And then is it a reimbursement grant or they just send you the money?
An existing grantee want to take that one? I don't deal with
We get
financial
reimbursed, yeah.
administration.
Same as ESG, you file for reimbursement. Got it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of the clumping, not the administration.
Not the clamping.
I'm still in the learning.
So, once we have all of our applications clumped, we must rate them. So in every NOFO, the CoC will create a priority listing that ranks all of our applicants, new and renewing, based on performance, if they're a renewing applicant, or predicted positive impact on our CoC's performance measures if they're a new applicant. To determine a project's performance, we use that renewal rating tool. So there's one specific rating tool that's used for renewing applicants. And then to determine the predicted positive impact, we'll use the new project rating tool. So we have two separate tools for renewing grantees and first-time grantees. And both of these tools are on our website. I highly encourage you to take a look at them because it's going to be important for you to know what exactly do they want to see from me in order to get up as high up in this priority listing as I can. And the tools help create those numeric values that allow us to compare and rank all of our applicants. I've got it linked on this PowerPoint. Right now, the grants committee is wrapping up some edits to the renewal tool. CoC has full authority to build and edit all of our rating tools. HUD gives us suggestions, but then we build them ourselves. And so we're finishing up some edits to the renewal tool. And it won't be very long until we look at any necessary edits to the new project rating tool. So, the one that's published on the website is the one that we will use. If we make any edits to it or come up with something different, it'll be updated on the website. So you can trust that what's on there is what your agency will be held to, unless a new, very public announcement is shared with the continuum. And this is what the priority listing looks like. Let's see if I can zoom in. I don't think I made it any better. But at least now we can kind of move back. And look, people and zoom back on. So this was our priority listing for 2023. This is something that we post publicly on our website, so you can find the 2023 priority listing. You'll see that we have everybody ranked top to bottom. Kind of with two systems in place. So our CoC has traditionally had a practice where we will put all of our renewing grantees at the top and our new grantees at the bottom. And the reason that we do that is because our CoC feels as a collective that, you know, losing an existing project and exiting people out of a housing project, potentially back to homelessness, would be more damaging to our community than the possibility of not getting a new project. By all means, we want new projects and we want new agencies to be able to create new projects. But we've just, you know, the impact of losing an existing project would be greater than the impact of not gaining a new one. So you'll see that all of our renewal grantees are in the top portion here, and then we have our news. So the renewal grantees are ranked top to bottom from their score from the rating tool. And then the new grantees are rated top to bottom from their score from the new project rating tool. Do those two sort of criteria make sense for how our CoC traditionally does it? Okay, so that's how the grants committee typically puts it together. The grants committee drafts the first version. So the grants committee rates all the projects and drafts this first version of the priority listing. And then it's reviewed by our CoC's rating and ranking committee. The rating and ranking committee has one sole purpose throughout the year, and that's to help us create this priority listing. The rating and ranking committee is 4 people, 1 from each chapter, that specifically work at agencies that don't receive any CoC funding. So they are our non-biased parties by design. And they'll look at this priority listing and we give them full authority to alter it however they see fit. So, you know, we know that no matter how much we improve our tools, they're not going to be perfect. And so that's kind of our human element in developing our priority listing, our unbiased human element in theory. To say, you know what, our continuum really needs more projects for victims or survivors of domestic violence. We really need to be putting that at the forefront of our efforts. And so right here, like Safe Harbor, they were number 15 on our priority listing based on their scoring. The rating and ranking committee could say, we need projects for domestic violence victims more than we need for general population, and they could move Safe Harbor up in this ranking. So they have that final say to be able to shift around their priority listing. You'll notice that they're divided here into 3 sections. Every year, HUD gives us an estimated annual renewal demand, so our ARD. And what that annual renewal demand is the exact amount of money that we received from HUD last year. So they tell us, here's what we gave you last year. And then we have to create 2 tiers, so 2 tiering systems in our priority listing. Tier 1 is where we're saying, HUD, if you can only fund X number of projects, these are the ones to fund. Tier 1 can only be a certain percentage of our annual renewal demand. In 2023, it was 93%, was it 93 or 97? 97%. So that's how competitive it is, right? Where we're not even guaranteed to get all the projects that we got last year. Even if we don't create a single new project with bonus funds, one of our existing grantees is gonna have to be outside of tier 1. Anything that falls over that 97% has to go in tier 2. So that's why, you know, we put all of our top performing renewals into tier 1. And then new projects and bottom performing renewals into tier 2. Safe Harbor this year, typically there's only a tier 1 and tier 2. Safe Harbor, we put them as sort of a straddle project where we told HUD, you know, if we don't get tier 2 this year, at least give Safe Harbor a certain percentage of this grant as part of their renewal. And so we squeezed in as much as we could into our tier 1, and whatever was left from that grant went into tier 2. So it was possible that Safe Harbor could have gotten a reduction in their grant, but they did not. So we have our annual renewal demand, and then HUD also gives us our CoC bonus and our DV bonus. And these are the pots of money that we can use to create new projects. The CoC bonus is for new projects that serve general population, and DV bonus is for new projects that serve victims or survivors of domestic violence. Again, HUD's not saying you get $450,000 to build new projects. Congratulations. This is the maximum amount that you could apply for. You might not get it, but
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the CoC bonus, is it permanent supportive housing bonus?
so the CoC bonus is for any project type
Okay,
that serves the general population of people
Okay.
experiencing homelessness. So anybody who's not a survivor of domestic violence.
okay.
So with the CoC bonus, you could build a rapid rehousing project, a permanent supportive housing project, a joint transitional and rapid project, supportive services only. Anything that HUD says you can build as an eligible project type is built using that CoC bonus.
Okay.
Same thing with the DV. It could be a rapid project, it could be a PSH project, so long as it's serving.
How do they come up, how do they come up with that number?
I genuinely do not know.
I can speak to that. Okay,
Yeah.
so what happens is there is a preliminary pro rata need. All these geographic areas all over the United States, you know, are divided up into different sections. Like for our state, we have 4 continuums. And so what they do is look at population size, poverty, housing, age of housing. And so they come up with this preliminary pro rata need. And I don't know why I was thinking ours was $3.7 million, but actually this is one of my goals, is that we could have over $6 million. And so that's what they have. This is part of, you know, our tier 1. So like Natalie said, our annual renewal demand, each year there will be a grant inventory worksheet that comes out of all the renewals plus any, new increases for fair market rent that come out. And so our annual renewal demand is what is eligible for renewal, like you were asking. They already know just based on if they did everything like they were supposed to, they're eligible for renewal. And that's what the ARD is. And then the final preliminary pro rata need is whichever is bigger. The initial preliminary pro rata need or the annual pro rata need. So that's why we always want to encourage people to go for the bonuses so we can increase our reach. So we want people to go after the CoC bonus and the permanent supportive housing bonus, the DV bonus. So just over time, we've grown this reach of the continuum already. We used to not have safe harbor, our daily rest, or who else? And of course, we've lost some different ones too, but.
Like relatively though, over the past several years, we've been pretty stagnant. We've hovered around this 3.5-ish mark. And the only reason, or the only way that we can increase that is every year we go for the full bonus. We create as many new projects as we can rally up organizations to apply for. Yeah, we might not get them. Yeah, we might only get part of them. But if we do get at least some, that increases our annual renewal demand next year, increases our bonus pots.
Yeah.
So it's like a exponential build of what's available to us and what we're promised to get every year too. A absolutely jaw-dropping example from NHSTC. Oh, so this is the Pennsylvania balance of state continuum. So this is every county in the whole state except for like their Greenville and Columbia, so like except for like their major cities, which are their own CoCs. It's a very wide-reaching. They get a lot more money than us. But for the past like 7 years, since 2018, their statewide domestic violence coalition applied for 100% of the DV bonus funds possible, got them every time, and it has totaled up to $45 million worth of funding for new projects. So over 7 years, by applying for the DV bonus every single time it goes up, up, up. And their CC is strong enough where they get the bonus funds every year. That's just crazy.
Wow.
So that's a very wild example, but just a testament to the fact that we need to be reaching as far as we can into these bonus funds every year.
And I think now that we have a more targeted view of what we can do to increase our point system, it's possible.
Yeah, domestic violence funds go toward 100% towards victims.
Victim program, yeah.
It could be a supportive services only, so,
Well, I deal with the perpetrators.
oh, yeah, Sometimes they're both,
Yes.
yes. Really too, and sometimes if the police can't tell, they'll take both to jail.
So these are just some bullet points for you to go back on about what we just talked about. I just figured it was more helpful to see the visual of what our priority listing looks like while we talked about it. The one thing that we didn't really get to was this process of how HUD decides which tier 2 projects are funded. So like I said, typically we put our new projects into tier 2. So you would want to know, how do I know if my tier 2 project is going to be funded? Well, all tier 2 projects, whether they are a new project or a renewal, an expansion grant, whether they're created with CoC bonus funds or DV bonus funds, it doesn't matter, any project in tier 2. The way HUD decides if that project is going to be funded comes from this equation. 50% is based on the score that we received from our collaborative application. So that narrative-based application about the work we're doing as a coalition. That's why it's super important that we're always working to increase that score. 40% comes from where your project falls on the priority list. So even though we're talking about all tier 2 projects, HUD sees a difference between number 15, number 16, and number 17. So number 15 is more likely to be ranked or awarded, even if they all fall in tier 2. And then 10 points come on whether or not your project adheres to housing first principles. So most of that weight comes from the CoC score. If our score high enough and we, get to that point, they're going top down on the priority listing in terms of who's awarded. I think Zoom is seeing the right thing right now. Yeah. It's been a little bit of a computer-y day. And then, talking about how important it is that our score is high, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that our new applicants or interested applicants can focus on in order to help increase our whole continuum score. Of course, it's not your full responsibility to make that lift as a new applicant. These are just things that would bolster our score if you were able to bring those to the table. In the first session today, we covered steps for the whole CoC to follow to improve our NOFO score. But what new applicants can focus on is developing written formal agreements to be able to use housing subsidies or subsidized housing units, which are not funded by the CoC or ESG in their program. Developing written formal agreements with a healthcare provider, meaning that healthcare provider promises some form of services to the people that are going to be in your program. And then also helping to increase our HMIS utilization rates. So if your project is awarded and you get that CoC funding to build your project, you'll be required to document the clients that you're serving in our HMIS. But it's also very likely that your agency is running other existing programs. Maybe you have an emergency shelter that's not currently logged on HMIS and you want to create a rapid rehousing project. You get that rapid rehousing project, you're going to have to start documenting those people on HMIS. You would do our CoC a favor if you also put your emergency shelter on our HMIS, where you checked people in and out of your emergency shelter through our database. HUD wants for us to have as many projects, no matter the project type, on HMIS as we can within our 13 county geography. And we get points on the NOFO for the more that we have.